Entire islands vanishing into thin air, 30 whales mysteriously washing ashore dead, a remote island where people keep turning up dead. We've all heard about the lost city of Atlantis, but what about other islands that mysteriously vanish? One of the strangest cases in recent history is Sandy Island, which was charted back in 1774 by Captain James Cook. It appeared on maps for centuries, even being recorded on Google Maps as recently as 2012. But here's where it gets really weird. When Australian scientists went to find it that same year, 2012, they came up empty. They recorded ocean depths of over 4,300 feet or 1,310 meters where the island should have been, but no island, just deep water. So was Sandy Island ever really there? Some think it could have been a cartographer's error or a phantom island that only appeared on maps because of miscalculations or mistaken sightings, but with no answers and no island to show for it, Sandy Island is one of the strangest and eeriest mysteries of the Pacific. Koh Tao, or Turtle Island in the Gulf of Thailand, is known for its beautiful beaches, coral reefs, and resorts. It really does look like quite the getaway, but it's also sometimes referred to as Death Island. So how did it get that nickname? Well, it all started with a string of mysterious deaths. In 2012, a young man named Ben Harrington died after an apparent motorcycle accident on the island, but there was more to it. His wallet and watch were missing. His mother, of course, suspected foul play, especially after the coroner kind of hesitated to call it an accident. In 2014, two British backpackers, Hannah Withridge and David Miller, were found dead on the same beach where Ben had stayed 2 years earlier. Local police mishandled the crime scene and rushed to blame two migrant workers who were eventually convicted, but crucial evidence like DNA samples were never collected. As if that weren't disturbing enough, 2 weeks later another body turned up on that same beach, 24-year-old Luke Miller, found at the bottom of a swimming pool. Then a woman vanished from a Koh Tao hostel, and 6 weeks later the body of Belgian tourist Elise Del Magni was found. Her body had been wrapped in t-shirts. Then in January of 2015, Christina Marion Ansley's body was discovered in a bungalow, but authorities waited days to conduct a post-mortem. The UK's coroner rejected the Thai results, citing incompetence. With no answers or closure, rumors of a serial killer family on the island started to spread, but till this day we still don't know for sure. In 2015, something strange happened off the coast of Alaska when 30 whales stranded themselves on the shores of Kodiak archipelago. Almost all of them died, and nearly every one of the whales was a fin whale. Experts also realized that the whales likely all died around the same time. Now, at first scientists thought toxic algae might have caused it, but they quickly ruled that out because no other species of marine animals showed similar signs of death. A few months earlier, though, a mass die-off of birds occurred along the same coastline, but they weren't sure if the birds and the whales died from the same cause. It's possible that there were more dead whales out there that either got eaten by scavengers or drifted out of reach. On January 29, 1921, the Carol A. Deering, a schooner, was headed home to Virginia after a trip to Barbados. As it passed a light ship off the coast of North Carolina, the captain of the watch vessel noticed something odd. The crew of the Deering appeared to be wandering aimlessly on the deck, and when the lightship's overseer called out, a crew member yelled back saying they had lost their anchors. Just a few days later, another ship, the SS Lake Ellen, spotted the Carol A. Deering again. The captain of the Lake Ellen wrote in his log that the crew seemed to be acting strangely and that the ship was drifting off on a, quote, peculiar course. Then 2 days later, the US Coast Guard discovered the Deering had washed up on North Carolina's Outer Banks. The weather was too bad for a full inspection, but they did notice that the Deering was missing its lifeboats. When the Coast Guard returned after the weather had cleared, they found something even stranger on the ship. Nothing but a full meal that was cooked, prepared, and perfectly laid out, sitting completely untouched, as if the crew had vanished in the middle of eating. All their personal items were also gone. It was like no one had ever been on board at all. Until this day, the mystery has never been solved. The lost continent of Mu, also known as Lemuria, is one of the most mysterious ocean myths. According to some theories, Mu is a massive civilization that existed in the Pacific Ocean between 10,000 and 50,000 years ago, home to over 60 million people. These people were believed to belong to a highly advanced culture known as the Nakal. The idea of Mu was first introduced by Augustus Le Plongeon, a British-American writer, who argued that Egypt and Mesoamerica were created by survivors of this lost land. Later, James Churchward expanded on this theory, writing that Mu was located somewhere between Easter Island and the Marianas. Churchward claimed that the continent was destroyed by a series of catastrophic earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. But modern geologists have strongly rejected this idea, pointing out that it's impossible for a continent to disappear so quickly. But even still, the legend of Mu persists to this day. The Black Sea, often referred to as both the inhospitable sea and the hospitable sea, is said to be a very mysterious place. This stretch of water has seen more than its fair share of strange sightings and unexplained disappearances. In 2000, for example, an explorer named Robert Ballard made a pretty fascinating discovery, finding evidence that a massive flood may have wiped out ancient civilizations in the Black Sea. Throughout the Middle Ages, sailors reported seeing mysterious whirlpools that would suddenly appear, even on calm waters, pulling ships and entire islands into the depths. The whirlpools were so feared that fishermen avoided the area altogether, believing that it was cursed. And even more recently, in 1945, 5 Soviet bombers vanished over the Black Sea, never to be seen again. A similar incident occurred in 1990 when a Greek plane disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Then in 1991, a Russian oil rig was found abandoned in the sea with all 80 workers missing and their possessions and half-eaten meals left behind. And these are just a handful of the mysterious things that have happened in the Black Sea. In October of 1988, 2 friends, Michael Calvin and John Blissett, set out from Fremantle, Australia on a luxury schooner called the Patanella. During the trip, Calvin sent a letter to his twin sister telling her how great the weather was and how much fun he and Blissett were having. They were also excited about starting their own charter business once they returned home after Christmas. Before they left, Calvin and Blissett even decided to put a message in a bottle to send out to sea, offering a free holiday on board their boat for anyone who found the letter. But the men were never seen or heard from again. The ship vanished off the coast of Sydney, but nearly 20 years later, in 2007, a woman named Cheryl Weidman found an old bottle while beachcombing, and inside was a note that read, "Hi there, out here in the lonely Southern Ocean, and thought we would give away a free holiday." The note also had Blissett's phone number and the Patanella's position when it was sent out. Till this day, though, the wreckage of the ship has never been found. In February of 1968, the USS Scorpion, a nuclear-powered submarine, left Norfolk, Virginia, headed for the Mediterranean. With nearly a decade of reliable service, there was no reason to suspect anything wrong would happen, but just a few months later, something did. On May 27, 1968, families waited for the Scorpion to return, but it never did. By October, the Navy found the wreckage on the ocean floor and found that all 99 men aboard had died. But there were no clear answers as to what had happened. In 1985, famous explorer Robert Ballard, again who would later discover the Titanic wreck, visited the Scorpion site, but even he couldn't solve the mystery. Over the years, several theories have been put forward. Some think the Scorpion was attacked by the Soviets. Others think the sub accidentally fired one of its own torpedoes during a training exercise and it turned back and hit the Scorpion, but unfortunately, we may never know for sure. In February of 1748, just before Valentine's Day, the Lady Lovibond set sail off the coast of England, heading home to celebrate the captain's wedding. But things got sour during the journey when the captain discovered that his bride-to-be was actually in love with his best friend. So the captain decided to take his own life, as well as everyone else on board, steering the ship straight into the Goodwin Sands. Everyone died in the disaster. And since that day, though, there have been sightings of a ship that looks eerily similar to the Lady Lovibond. Over the years, sailors have reported encounters with what seemed to be a ghost ship. Captains sailing near the Goodwin Sands have claimed to see a ship appear out of nowhere, only for it to vanish before they could reach it. Others have spotted what looked like a wrecked ship in the distance, only to find nothing when they get closer. The most famous story happened in the early 1900s, though, when locals in Kent saw a 3-masted ship heading full speed toward the Goodwin Sands, and knowing it would crash, they rushed to help, but when they arrived, nothing was there. In 1906, the SS Valencia was caught in a violent storm off the coast of British Columbia, Canada. Rescue boats rushed to the scene and lifeboats were deployed, but only 37 people survived. Then in 1910, things took a strange turn. That year, people started claiming that they'd seen a phantom ship drifting in the area. Locals in British Columbia and fishermen out at sea were spotting lifeboats, and they were filled with skeletons. Many believe the ghostly lifeboats were somehow connected to the Valencia, and the creepy events didn't stop here either. In 1933, nearly 30 years after the Valencia sank, the ship's number 5 lifeboat was discovered completely intact in British Columbia's Barkley Sound. Despite being out in open ocean for decades, exposed to the harsh sea and salty water, the lifeboat showed no signs of wear or damage. When the rest of the wreckage of the Valencia was later found near a 100-foot high bluff, no one could explain how that lifeboat survived so perfectly intact for so long. The mystery of the Valencia and its phantom lifeboats remains unsolved. One of the creepiest unsolved mysteries of the ocean is the Vela incident. It was September 22nd of 1979 when a strange, bright flash of light lit up the skies near the Indian Ocean. The flash was detected by an American satellite which was monitoring for nuclear tests. Now, this flash appeared to be from a nuclear explosion, but it didn't come from any country that was openly conducting tests at the time. The location of the flash was near the southern coast of Africa, and it seemed to match the exact area where an unknown ship might have been conducting a secret nuclear test, but no one knew who would have been behind it. Some theories go that it could have been Israel testing a nuclear weapon in secret, or even a rogue South African operation, but no one's ever come out and said anything. Here's the extra eerie part though. Despite what seemed to be a nuclear test, there was no fallout, no debris. It's a very strange case, and most of the details about it seem to be pretty hush-hush. So was it a secret nuclear test, an accident, or something else entirely? The Palmyra Atoll is said to be one of the most eerie remote places on Earth. This tiny island, just 1.5 miles long, was discovered in 1798 by Captain Edward Fanning, who supposedly had a strange feeling about it before even seeing it. Fanning, sailing through the Pacific, was jolted awake 3 times during the night by an intense sense of danger. The final time, he found himself inexplicably dressed and rushing to the deck. His gut feeling led him to stop the ship for the night, and in the morning they saw what he had sensed: deadly reefs lying just ahead. If he'd ignored his instincts, the ship and its crew would have been lost. Since then, Palmyra's become rather infamous for bizarre and tragic events. One of the most disturbing incidents happened in 1974 when a couple, Mac and Muff Graham, arrived on the island for a visit. They were joined by another couple, Buck Walker and his girlfriend Stephanie Stearns, but things quickly turned dark. Walker, a fugitive with a violent past, killed the Grahams for their boat and supplies. According to Stearns, Walker killed them and their bodies were hidden in a metal container. Muff Graham's remains were discovered 6 years later by a couple visiting the island, washed up on the shore. It was found that Muff had been dismembered before being burnt and dumped. Mac's remains, however, were never found. But that's not the only dark thing to have taken place here. Hal Horton, a Navy officer stationed on Palmyra during World War II, spoke openly about the strange and tragic incidents that seemed to plague this island, including aircraft vanishing. Horton was quoted telling of how at least 2 planes were lost in broad daylight, their pilots mysteriously vanishing. He also mentioned the frequent equipment malfunctions that pilots experienced while landing or taking off from the island. According to Horton, these issues were so frequent that sailors and officers stationed there started calling it the Palmyra Curse. Horton described the island as incredibly small, so much so that a plane flying just 10,000 feet above it on a cloudy day might not even spot it. Once we heard a plane overhead, but he crashed in the drink before he could find the runway, Horton said. Tragically, the pilot didn't survive. We didn't get to the poor guy fast enough. Sharks found him first, he added. It didn't seem like it was just all bad luck. There was apparently this sense that something was just off about the place. In 2015, Japan's Coast Guard came across at least 12 wooden boats carrying the decaying bodies of 22 people. Some were nearly skeletons, 2 were even missing heads. The first boat appeared in October, and then more turned up in November. The Japan Coast Guard was left trying to piece together the mystery as to where these boats came from and what had happened to the people on board. The boats looked like they'd come from North Korea. One clue was found on a boat that carried 10 decomposing bodies. The hull had Korean lettering that read North Korea's military. Another clue was a tattered piece of cloth which looked like it could be from a North Korean flag. Some believe these boats were just lost fishing vessels. Others think they might have been used by defectors trying to escape North Korea. The thing is, this isn't an isolated incident. North Korean ghost ships wash up in Japan all the time. Every year, derelict boats from North Korea wash up on Japan's shores, some with no crew, others carrying the remains of those lost at sea. Most of these ghost ships seem to be North Korean fishermen who get stranded out at sea, but that doesn't explain every case. In March of 1918, the USS Cyclops, a massive Navy ship nearly 550 feet long, vanished without a trace, leading to one of the biggest mysteries in naval history. The ship, carrying a crew of 306 and tons of manganese ore, was on its way from Brazil to Baltimore. The last message sent was simply, "Weather fair, all well," but the ship was never heard from again. Not even an SOS was received. She just disappeared as though some gigantic monster of the sea had grabbed her, men and all, and sent her into the depths. That's what was written in Santa Fe magazine a couple years after the disappearance. Now, as for what happened, some think maybe a German submarine sank the ship, but no evidence ever turned up to support that. Marvin Barish, whose ancestor was one of the Cyclops' crew, has spent years researching this mystery. He believes mechanical failures combined with the ship's heavy cargo may have caused it to capsize, especially near the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest part of the Atlantic. He's still hoping that modern technology might one day uncover the wreckage, saying, "I just want her to be found. I want the 309 to be at rest, as well as the families." In 1946, something strange happened over Scandinavia. Reports started flooding in from Sweden, Finland, and Norway about bright, mysterious objects in the sky. Sometimes during the day, sometimes at night. One report even mentioned a rocket-like object crashing into a lake, but nothing was ever recovered. These sightings became so widespread that the phenomenon was dubbed the Swedish ghost rockets. Some think the objects were Soviet missiles, leftovers from German V-2 rockets. In fact, by 1946, the Soviets had begun their own missile program, testing missiles in the exact region where the ghost rockets were reported. The timing fit perfectly, and for a while, a lot of people believed these rockets were Soviet-made weapons being tested in secret. But it turns out that the Soviets hadn't actually launched any V-2 missiles in 1946. After the war, the Germans' V-2 factories were mostly scavenged by the Allies, and the Soviets were behind in missile development, so while it made sense at the time, we're just not sure if that theory holds up today. As the reports continued to come in, though, back in the day, the press began calling the objects flying bombs. Some even speculated they were alien spacecraft. Eventually, scientists came out saying there was no solid evidence that any missiles had been launched, and said that some of these supposed rockets were probably just shooting stars. But if that were the case, I mean, why was it only happening then? What, I mean, people had never seen a shooting star before? It just seems like a weak explanation to me. Till this day, we still don't know for sure what happened over the Baltic Sea that year. The Michigan Triangle, which makes up this area of the water that you see here, is almost just as strange as the notorious Bermuda Triangle. Over the years, ships, planes, and the people on them have vanished, and many of these cases are still unsolved. One of the earliest incidents dates back to 1679, when the French sailing ship Le Griffon disappeared without a trace after leaving Green Bay. No wreckage, has ever been found for that one. Then there's the bizarre case of the Rosabelle, a schooner that capsized twice with no sign of its crew. In 1921, the ship was found overturned, the crew missing. Even more strange, the captain had a premonition before setting sail and had refused to board that day, which ended up saving his life. On April 28, 1937, Captain George R. Donner was in command of a ship traveling from Erie, Pennsylvania to Port Washington, Wisconsin. One night, Donner went back to his cabin after a long shift. His second mate was supposed to wake him once they were at their destination, but when the mate went to check on him a few hours later, Donner was gone, and they searched every inch of that ship, but he was never seen again. The most infamous case was on June 23rd of 1950 though. A flight piloted by Robert C. Lind was en route from New York to Minneapolis when it hit bad weather near Chicago. The plane changed course and headed over Lake Michigan. Around midnight, Lind requested to drop the altitude, but his request was denied. And that was the last communication anyone heard from Flight 2501. It vanished, and its last known position was within the Michigan Triangle. In 2006, a ghost ship was spotted drifting off the coast of Queensland, Australia. The vessel, identified as the Jian Seng, didn't show any signs of a struggle. There was a broken tow rope, but that was about it. A patrol vessel was sent in to investigate, and when they boarded this empty ship, they found it eerily quiet. There were no signs that any violent struggle had happened or anything like that. It was just an empty ship floating along, and it looked like it had been floating for a while because it was completely out of fuel. Stranger though, the origin of the ship has never been found. Nobody knows where it came from or where it was going. It hadn't been registered, and no search had ever been made for it. There was a large amount of rice on the ship though, which has led some to believe that this was a resupply vessel for fishing boats. The Devil's Sea, also known as the Dragon's Triangle, is like the Pacific Ocean's version of the Bermuda Triangle. Located off the coast of Japan, the area has become rather infamous for strange magnetic anomalies, unexplained lights, and of course, unsolved disappearances. Japanese fishing authorities even consider it a dangerous spot. One of the most chilling stories happened in 1952, when Japan sent out a research vessel to investigate the Devil's Sea. The ship and its 31-person crew disappeared without a trace. As for what's really behind it all, you have your standard theories. Aliens, portals to parallel universes. Some scientists think volcanic activity in the region could explain the disappearances, but whatever the cause, it seems like this area gets its name for a very good reason. Flight 19 was a US Navy training flight that disappeared over the Bermuda Triangle on December 5th of 1945. The flight involved 5 TBM Avenger bombers led by Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, along with 14 crew. They were on a routine training exercise. No one was expecting anything to go wrong, but it did. It began when Lieutenant Taylor's compasses started malfunctioning. After completing their tasks, Taylor and his crew got lost. Radio transmissions showed that Taylor thought he was over the Florida Keys, but his compass was giving false readings. At one point he said, "I am over land, but it's broken. I'm sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down, and I don't know how to get to Fort Lauderdale." As the confusion continued to grow, other pilots in the group said, "Well, why don't we fly west and head back to Florida?" But Taylor insisted on continuing in the wrong direction. By the time they realized something was seriously wrong, they were far out over the Atlantic, with their fuel running low. Taylor radioed, "We are heading 030 degrees for 45 minutes, then we will fly north to make sure we are not over the Gulf of Mexico." But the weather was getting bad, and radio contact started cutting out. Taylor's last message, "All planes close up tight, we'll have to ditch unless landfall," was heard just before they vanished. While all this was happening, another aircraft was sent to search for Flight 19, but it also disappeared. Until this day, there's never been any trace of the missing planes or the crew.
Starting off this countdown, we have the giant cannibal shark. Sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. Honestly, maybe it is. So in 2003, scientists tagged a 9-foot-long great white shark. They did this in order to study the temperature changes in the ocean. Here's the thing. Several months later, the tag washed up on shore. The shark, nowhere to be seen. They checked the information on the tag, and that's when they were shocked. About 4 months after the tag was put on the shark, it dove to around 1,900 feet. They believe that's because the shark was attacked and eaten by something. But what creature in the ocean is going around eating a 9-foot-long great white shark? They still don't know. It could be a massive sea creature that we haven't found yet. Or they think it might be an even bigger shark, making it a massive cannibal shark. If you're not afraid of the ocean yet, then this for sure has done it for you. Coming in at number 9, we have the lost city of Atlantis. There's a city that lies sunken underwater just off the coast of the Japanese island Yonaguni, making it Japan's very own Atlantis. Many people believe that the city is around 5,000 years old. There are complete pyramids, ruins of a castle, structures etched with faces, and rock sculptures that look like animals all underwater. It's theorized that a terrible earthquake caused the city to be engulfed by water. But to this day, we don't know the true origins of this mysterious underwater city. Conspiracy theorists believe that the CIA destroyed this island in order to expand America's economic zone. Unless we travel back in time, there's no way to find out more about the city and what happened to it. Coming in at number 8, we have Carol A. Deering, aka the ghost ship of the Outer Banks. So on January 31st, 1921, the Carol A. Deering was found abandoned off of Cape Hatteras in North Carolina. The crew was nowhere to be found. On top of that, tons of stuff was missing from the ship, including the crew's personal belongings, life rafts, logbooks, and navigational equipment. To this day, no one knows what happened to the crew aboard the ship. But of course, we got some theories. Theory 1 is that a mutiny occurred. Theory 2 is that they were ransacked by pirates. Theory 3 is that they were taking part in rum running. People stole the ship to use for the rum running. And when they were done, they just abandoned the ship and left it there. But like I said before, we don't know for sure. In our 7th spot, we have the electronic fog. Okay, this one is pretty weird, not gonna lie. So on December 4th, 1970, a man named Rob McGregor was flying over the Bermuda Triangle when he was met by this weird tunnel-shaped vortex. He entered it and apparently his wings sounded like they were scraping along metal. All of the electronic and magnetic navigational instruments malfunctioned. When he looked up, all he saw was a dull gray fog. Also, there were strange clouds forming behind the airplane. They were only in the clouds for a couple of minutes, but claimed that they traveled for 40 minutes. When they got out of the fog, they were over Miami Beach, a flight that would have taken 75 minutes. He believes that this weird fog is what has caused other planes and boats and passengers to disappear in the Bermuda Triangle. So what is this weird electronic fog that he encountered while over the ocean? That's something I want to know. In our 6th spot today, we have the time travel. Legend goes that one day 3 ships were traveling through the Bermuda Triangle. Everything was going fine until they encountered a mysterious fog. When they emerged through the other end of the fog, there were only 2 ships. The other ship was way ahead of them. The crew aboard the ship claimed that the fog transported them back in time several years. There, they saw a bunch of different boats and passengers also sailing. Then they approached the same fog and they got transported back to the current day. Isn't that weird? Was this the same fog the pilot encountered? Like, what is going on in the ocean? We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the disappearance of Keith Davis. Now, this case is certainly going to keep you up at night, so just a little warning. So in 2015, Keith Davis, a fisheries observer, headed out to sea with his crew. His job was to monitor all the catches and collect data on it. But about a month later, Keith disappeared off the ship in the middle of the day, in broad daylight. He has never been found. On top of that, the weather that day was calm, and he was an experienced observer, so it's not like he just fell overboard by accident. So what happened to him? Well, theory goes that he knew too much, so someone got rid of him. When police searched his email, they found photographic evidence of illegal things happening on board these ships, like they were allegedly smuggling people. He was also keeping track of a number of rule violations. Not only that, a year before his disappearance, Keith sent a mysterious email to his friends. In the email was a video of 4 men being shot to death while holding onto debris in the ocean. So theory goes that Keith was killed for knowing way too much. But still, to this day, we don't know exactly what happened to him. Coming in at number 4, we have the Ellen Austin. In 1880, a ship named the Ellen Austin set sail to New York from Liverpool. During their travels, the crew spotted a ship floating near the Bermuda Triangle. They approached it and found that nothing was wrong with the ship, but all the crew on board were missing. So they decided to put some of their own crew members on board this mysterious ship and have it come with them. But during the trip, the two ships got separated. They were separated for a couple of days before the Ellen Austin spotted the ship once again. However, all their crew on board vanished. There was no trace of them. Now the story goes on saying that they placed another set of crew members aboard the ship, and once again the exact same thing happened to those men. They disappeared off the ship without a trace. But that account hasn't been confirmed. Either way, this mystery gave birth to an urban legend. Basically, a cursed ghost ship lurks the waters near the Bermuda Triangle. Those who hop on board will mysteriously disappear without a trace. In our third spot, we have the disappearing aircrafts. In 1945, 5 torpedo bomber planes took off for a 3-hour exercise. But while flying over the Atlantic Ocean, they disappeared without a trace. It all started when the flight's leader noticed that his compass wasn't working properly. So he was worried that they were flying in the wrong direction. He instructed the planes to then change paths, thinking that they were going to then be heading towards Florida. But in reality, they were just traveling deeper into the Atlantic. As the planes started getting close to the Bermuda Triangle, their signals began to fail. The last few things the pilots ever said were, and I quote, "Everything looks strange, even the ocean. And it looks like we are entering white water. We're completely lost." Then the communication was cut completely and they were never heard from again. In our second spot, we have the severed feet. What would you do if you were out on a nice stroll on the beach when you came across someone's missing arm or foot? Believe it or not, this has happened a number of times. Since 2007, severed human feet have been washing up on the shore of the Pacific Northwest. The first was a right foot still inside of a size 12 Adidas shoe. The second was again a right foot, size 12, but it was in a Reebok shoe. Since then, 15 more feet have washed up on shore. To this day, we don't know who they belong to or what happened to them, or even if they were victims of the same killer. It's really freaking creepy if you ask me. And in our number one spot today, we have the Witchcraft. This is the name of a boat that set sail on December 22nd, 1967. On board was the captain, Dan Burrack, and his friend, Patrick Horgan. The two headed off to get a good look at Miami's Christmas lights. However, after traveling just 1 mile out, they contacted the Coast Guard, saying that the boat had hit something. But there was no damage. Dan seemed to be calm on the call to the Coast Guard and said they just needed a tow to the shore. So they figured that the boat's propeller was just damaged or something like that. The Coast Guard immediately went out, but when he arrived at the spot the boat was said to be, no one was there. It took him only 19 minutes to get there, yet the boat was already gone. Here's where it gets super weird. This boat was virtually unsinkable. Not only did they have life jackets and lifeboats on board, but the boat had a special flotation device installed in it. This made it basically unsinkable. So even if the boat started filling with water, part of it would still be sticking out of the water, so the Coast Guard would be able to see it. And also, they had flare guns on board with them, so if something serious started to happen, they could have set those off. They didn't. The boat and the two friends on board just disappeared without a trace, and to this day have never been found.
In our number 10 spot today, we have the upsweep. We all know how little we know about the ocean, and that includes what kinds of creatures lie in it. So while this mysterious sound out of context probably wouldn't be that freaky, when put into this situation it becomes quite a bit more eerie. This sound is referred to as upsweep, and it was caught when the Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory started its sound surveillance system in August of 1991. The sound is apparently more seasonal, with its peaks in spring and fall, but it is unclear if the changing of seasons is responsible for this sound, or if it's coming from something that lurks in the ocean and remains undiscovered. Just for reference, here is a clip of that sound played at 20 times the original speed. It is possible that this sound could be coming from underwater volcanic activity, but considering the fact that this has yet to be proven, I am here to ask the question, what if it's not? In our number 9 spot today, we have Bermeja. Bermeja was an island that could be found on many maps spanning from the 16th to the 20th century, but in a 1997 survey, the island could not be located. In an extensive 2009 study, it was concluded that the island that was once labeled as Bermeja just didn't exist, which left a whole host host of questions. The island was supposed to be located just off of the north coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, which is particularly important because if it did exist, its location would be integral to determining the boundaries for exploitation rights of oil in the Gulf of Mexico. So of course, when this island that's been included on many maps seemingly just doesn't exist anymore, people really began to speculate what could have happened. There are a few major theories with this one. The first is that the original observation of the island was incorrect and then no one ever went to double check that this island existed. The next being that possible shifts in the geography of the ocean floor along with rising sea levels were the cause for this island to completely disappear. The third theory is the most mysterious out of them all, and this is the theory that the island was blown up by the CIA so as to expand the economic zone belonging to the United States. It certainly is not an easy thing for an island to just disappear, so it truly is quite a large mystery about what exactly happened here, and at this point, it is unclear if we'll ever know for sure. In our number 8 spot today we have the Sarah Jo. The Sarah Jo was a fishing boat that departed from Maui in February of 1979. There were 5 crew members aboard the boat, and when they left around 10 AM that day, the skies were perfectly clear, but while they were out at sea, the wind began to change and they ended up encountering a horrible storm. People on shore who were rightfully worried about the crew headed to the shoreline to try and wave the boat back in, but they were unable to locate the boat at all. One of the passengers' fathers even went out on a separate boat in the middle of the storm to try and see if anything could be done or if he could at least locate the ship, but to no avail. It was presumed that all of the crew members had been lost due to the severity of the storm. The following days of course consisted of many hours of searching, but neither the ship or any of the men were located. Flash forward almost an entire decade to September of 1988, and a member of the initial search team, John Naughton, was on a wildlife expedition on a deserted atoll around 2,000 miles from Maui when he discovered a small boat and a makeshift grave. He left the site as untouched as he could and immediately contacted authorities, who were then able to confirm that the boat was the Sarah Jo and the person buried in the makeshift grave was one of the passengers who went missing all those years ago. While experts do agree that the boat could have drifted here and it would have only taken about 3 months to do so, this area was surveyed in 1985 and there was no trace of either the boat or the makeshift grave. So where would the boat and this crew member have been from the 1979 disappearance until after the 1985 survey? These are the types of questions that still remain unanswered to this day. There are of course theories, but none that cover all the mysteries this story holds. In our number 7 spot today we have the Yonaguni Monument. Just off of the coast of Yonaguni in Japan, there is a diving location that has a high population of hammerhead sharks, making it a large and popular attraction. In 1986, a diver in the area noticed some formation on the seabed that resembled a structure of some sort. This led to a team of scientists going on a dive to gather more information, and this is when the Yonaguni Monument was officially discovered. The monument is made of sandstone and mudstones, but here's the mysterious thing. Scientists can't agree on its origins. There are some who believe that this is a natural formation, but there are some who swear that it is man-made. The stairs are over 165 feet long and 65 feet wide, which obviously means that they are strikingly huge. There are pretty reasonable arguments for both sides, and considering the fact that this thing is at least 10,000 years old, I guess it's fair that we may not have all the answers, but it certainly is strange that we can't quite figure it out. At the end of the day, I really don't want to meet whatever thing would need stairs this large. In our number 6 spot today we have the Milky Sea phenomenon. This phenomenon is certainly much more beautiful than the name would suggest, and while we kind of know what causes it, there are still many unanswered questions that surround it. The first recorded sighting of this phenomenon occurred in 1846 when Raphael Semmes, who was the captain of the CSS Alabama, spotted it and was horrified by what he was seeing. He wrote, "From the deep blue water into a patch of water so light it startled me. The whole face of nature seemed changed, and with a little stretch of the imagination, the Alabama might have been conceived to be a phantom ship lighted up by the sickly and unearthly glare of a phantom sea." This phenomenon is so bright that it can be seen from the satellites orbiting Earth, and while it looks amazing in pictures, I can only imagine how frightening it would be to see in person when little is known about why it happens. It is believed that the glow is caused by bioluminescent bacteria that grows in all oceans in our world, but but in order to produce a glow like we've seen, this bacteria has to be multiplied by billions of trillions, and we don't know how or why this happens. Also, we don't know for sure if that is what is responsible for the glow, it's just our current best guess. Just for the sake of our expansive imaginations, let's say that it really is this bacteria causing the glow. Why does it come to the ocean surface? Why in such great numbers? Every time this happens, it's at unpredictable times, locations, and sizes, so basically it remains a strange but stunning ocean mystery. In our number 5 spot today we have the SS Beichimo. The SS Beichimo was built in Sweden in 1914 and it belonged to the Hudson's Bay Company. This ship was used to trade provisions for pelts in Inuit settlements along the Northwest Territories of Canada. On October 1st, 1931, the ship was ending its trading run and was packed with fur when it became trapped in pack ice. The crew decided to briefly abandon the ship and they traveled over the ice to the nearest town for shelter. Because of the location and the time, it wasn't exactly going to be simple for everyone to be rescued. On October 15th, the Hudson's Bay Company sent an aircraft to save 22 of the members, but 15 remained and began to prepare in case they needed to stay the winter. Because the ship couldn't be heated, the remaining crew members would return to the ship every few days to chip away some of the ice, but also to grab essential items from the ship. On November 24th, there was a powerful storm, and once it had cleared, the Beichimo was gone. The remaining crew assumed that it had sunk, but this is really where our mystery gets started. An Inuk hunter spotted the ship around 72 miles from the camp the remaining crew members had set up, and somehow they ended up locating it, removing the rest of the valuables, and then abandoning it for the last time because it was believed that this ship wouldn't last the rest of the winter. After the rest of the crew was finally rescued, the ship ended up being spotted around 480 miles from its previous sighting. For 40 years after, the Beichimo was frequently spotted floating in different locations, sometimes even providing people with shelter during storms, but was never once captured. In 2006, the Alaskan government began to work on a project to find the Beichimo, but since the most previous sighting, she has never been located again. While the ship is now presumed sunken, it would have been the longest sailing ghost ship of all time. Ships rarely survive for nearly as long while being unmanned, especially in the crushing icy waters. We still haven't found the wreck of this ship either, so perhaps it is still out there floating somewhere. In our number 4 spot today we have the Devil's Sea. The Devil's Sea is like the Bermuda Triangle of the Pacific as it lies in a region just south of Tokyo. This area is often thought as some sort of a paranormal area because of the consistent horrible happenings that occur in it. This area is one of the 12 vile vortices in the world, with the Bermuda Triangle being the most famous one. Above the Devil's Sea, planes are known to seemingly just drop out of the sky like something is reaching up and grabbing them. Methane deposits cause large explosions in the area, and during World War II, this area was the site of over 20 missing submarines. There have also been numerous ships, some twice the size of the Titanic, who have gone missing without a trace after sailing through the Devil's Sea. This is all to say that while we don't really know what lurks in this area, it's probably safest to just stay the heck away from it. In our number 3 spot today we have the Cassie Nicole. The Cassie Nicole was a boat that set sail from Richmond Hill, Georgia on April 10th, 1990 with 4 people on board. During the second day aboard, one of the passengers realized that the boat was suddenly taking on water, and at this same time the pumps and radio were not working, which left them with little to no options. The crew decided it was time to board a life raft and abandon ship. After a day of floating on this life raft, one of the passengers named Nathan saw the ship's hatch cover floating by them and thought that it might be able to support him better. Once he hopped onto the cover, he ended up losing sight of the other 3 crew members. Later in the day, he saw a freighter go by multiple times, and he was hoping that it had picked up the 3 crew members he had lost contact with. After 3 days of floating at sea, Nathan was finally rescued, but he received the news that the other crew members hadn't been found. Months went by with no sign of the others until a few months later when Nathan's sister, as well as the owner of the boat, began receiving strange phone calls from someone who was speaking in Spanish. The person on the other line said their name as well as the names of the missing people, and in the final phone call the stranger said, in English, "I'm bringing them home," but there has still never been a sign of them. The family of the disappeared men believe that they may be alive somewhere but are being held in a foreign country, but why? And why would someone say that they were bringing them home only to not do that? In our number 2 spot today we have the loneliest whale. This whale has been nicknamed the loneliest whale in the world, but the truth is, we don't really know if that's true because we've never actually seen it. This whale, which we don't know if it's a male or a female, or what whale species it it belongs to sings its song like no other whale does. The whale was first heard in 1989 on a hydrophone, and while the calls were most similar to that of a blue whale, there was one striking difference, and that was the frequency of the calls. This whale calls at 52 Hz, with regular blue whales calling between 10 and 40 Hz. Even fin whales are usually heard at 20 Hz, so it's just left everyone stumped as to what could be going on here. A researcher named Bill Watkins dedicated his life to trying to reveal what exactly is going on here, and while he passed away in 2004, he found that this whale was not only unusual, but totally unique. The biggest challenge is the fact that we cannot locate this whale. Their calls can be heard for hundreds of miles, and trying to find one single whale in the vastness of the ocean is next to impossible. Many people have suggested that perhaps the whale is deaf, and this is what has led to its unique song, but of course without the whale, how could we possibly know for sure? In our number 1 spot today we have the French sailors. Yves Emmanuel Payne and Laurent Hernas were French sailors who were hired to sail a boat to its new owners. Their trip would see them departing from Annapolis, Maryland and heading to Guadalupe, but when they never arrived at their destination, searches quickly began. Unlike many of the other stories similar to this one, there were actually sightings of this ship, most of them occurring along the intercoastal waterway, which was far off from the course the ship was intended to take. Along with these sightings came the frightening news that the witnesses claimed to see a third man on the boat, which made people begin to believe that it had been hijacked, which wouldn't have been all that surprising considering the state of the art vessel they were on. Despite these sightings, the boat was never found, and neither were the men. To add even more strange occurrences to this story, however, around 2 months after the disappearance, a police officer in South Carolina pulled over a speeding car. After a sort of strange encounter with those in the vehicle, it was later discovered that 2 of the 3 men in the car were the missing Yves Emmanuel and Laurent, but at this point they of course had already been released. What exactly happened here has never been fully discovered, despite this all happening in 1991. Were the sailors kidnapped? Were they part of an elaborate plan to steal the ship, despite their loved ones saying that they would never do such a thing? It all remains a mystery. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot we have the Nina. The Nina was a ship that was once the flagship of the New York Yacht Club, but that unfortunately changed in 2013 when it disappeared on the Tasman Seas with its owner and 6 other people on board. The ship had left New Zealand and was bound for Australia on May 29th, and it was estimated to be somewhere from an 8 to 10 day trip. The last time the ship was heard from was on June 4th, and it wasn't until June 12th that the search for the ship began after friends and family of those on board began to get worried as the ship was now a few days overdue. The rescuers searched until it was called off on July 6th after they had searched 737,000 square nautical miles and had found nothing. The search was extremely thorough and they still were unable to find anything. No yacht, no debris, no life raft, and none of the people on board. The last communications with the Nina came on June 3rd and 4th as a crew member was contacting a meteorologist and router for Pacific cruisers in order to get some advice on where the ship should go so as to escape a nasty storm they were encountering. There was also an undelivered text message from June 4th that the satellite phone company was able to retrieve that stated that the storm sails had been shredded the night before and that they would update them later at 6 p.m. with the course info. This definitely wasn't an ideal situation, but the message didn't signal that they would have been in immediate distress either. Aside from these messages, there wasn't any other contact that seemed to have been attempted, despite the ship being well equipped with emergency radios, flares, a satellite phone, and all of that sort of thing. Right now, the best guess as to what happened is that the ship may have sunk really quickly following the storms, and it didn't allow any time for the passengers to activate any of the emergency equipment, but at the end of the day, this is all just a guess, and what exactly happened out there still remains a mystery. In our number 9 spot today, we have the mysterious whale die-off. Between 2015 and 2016, there was a mysterious large die-off of whales located in the Gulf of Alaska. The deaths first began to be discovered in late May of 2015 when the carcasses of endangered fin whales were found floating near Kodiak. The total of whales found in the area climbed to 30, with additional reports of 5 other whales found in the waters just off of British Columbia. Because of the difficulties in retrieving the past whales, it was almost impossible to find out what exactly was causing this. The leading suspect was a toxin being produced by algae, but when one of the carcasses that researchers were able to recover was tested, it came up negative for the toxin that they were searching for. It is possible that the decomposition that had already taken place was the cause for this negative test, but it's also equally as possible that this just wasn't the cause in the first place. The good news is that since 2016, this strange and upsetting anomaly has stopped, so the whales are safe. But unfortunately, we aren't any closer to getting answers on what exactly happened here. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Kaz II. The Kaz II was a 12-meter long catamaran that set sail on April 15th of 2007 and was found adrift just 3 days later on April 18th, but without her crew. When the ship set sail, she was carrying 3 crew members, all of which were relatively inexperienced sailors. On April 18th, someone in a helicopter reported seeing the adrift ship, but it wasn't until April 20th that maritime authorities were able to catch up with the boat and boarded it. It was then, however, that they uncovered the bizarre circumstances on this ship. Everything on the ship was perfectly normal, aside from the fact that the crew had just seemingly vanished. There was a meal set on the table waiting to be eaten, a laptop was open and on, the engine was still running, all of the life vests were still on board, and all of the ship's emergency systems were fully functioning. The only out of place things were, of course, the missing crew, the fact that one of the ship's sails was badly shredded, and there was no life raft on board, but it is still unclear whether there was ever one on board. There are many theories as to what may have happened to the crew, but none have ever been substantiated or confirmed, which leaves the fate of the 3 crew members a complete mystery that we may never get the answers to. In our number 7 spot today, we have the disappearance of Bas Jan Ader. Bas Jan Ader was a Dutch conceptual and performance artist as well as a skilled sailor. He set sail on July 9th, 1975 in a ship called the Ocean Wave as he was setting sail to make his single-handed west to east coast crossing of the North Atlantic. He estimated that this trip was going to take around 2.5 months, but it wasn't until 9 months after he set sail that his boat was found unmanned, floating almost vertically in the water. The people who found the ship were Spanish fishermen who then took the boat back to Spain, where it ended up being stolen. Throughout all of this, Baz was nowhere to be found, and even still, over 40 years later, the mystery of what exactly happened remains. There are people who speculate he fell overboard in heavy bad weather, but this is of course impossible to tell, especially with neither the boat or Baz to provide evidence. The information to go on has only been what was provided by the people who saw the boat before it was stolen, so of course that is not nearly enough to really have any questions answered. What happened to Baz on his sailing trip is still a mystery, but I do hope one day we find out at least some answers. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Gulf of Mexico wreck. For almost 2 centuries, this shipwreck went undiscovered and undisturbed until the early 2000s when a pipeline bisected it, and since then it has been plaguing those who are trying to figure out what mysteries it holds. A team was assembled in order to try and search the wreckage, but every time they attempted, something went wrong that made it impossible for them. Every time they tried, the exploration sub would malfunction right before they were able to begin checking it out. Like, I'm talking about everything, from video monitors going out whenever they fired the thrusters, to the sonar breaking, to hydraulics going haywire, one after another. After this whole ordeal, the Navy sent a research sub that pretty much just ended up self-destructing its own rover once it got into the water, and when it made its way to the wreck, its arms were too short to reach anything to collect. So this is all to say that it seems like whatever mysteries this shipwreck is holding, they are destined to remain as such. I'm starting to think that maybe this shipwreck is cursed. In our number 5 spot today, we have the disappearance of George Smith. George Allen Smith and his wife Jennifer Hagel Smith had just married and were aboard the MS Brilliance of the Seas, which is a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, as they were doing a Mediterranean cruise for their honeymoon. On July 5th, 2005, the ship was somewhere just off of the coast of Turkey when it was discovered that George had disappeared. The night he was last seen, he was intoxicated from both alcohol as well as prescription drugs, and there was blood evidence found in his cabin as well on the side of the ship. There were two main theories in regards to his disappearance, the first being that his intoxication led to him falling overboard the ship, and the other was that perhaps a robbery had gone bad and foul play had been involved. This case was investigated for over a decade, with even the FBI and their mafia division getting involved at one point. But despite this, neither George, his body, or what really happened to him has ever been found. There have been many assumptions made over the years, but 16 years later, it is still a mystery. In our number 4 spot today, we have the MV Tai Ching 21. On November 9th, 2008, a Taiwanese fishing vessel was found floating, but it was empty and had been totally gutted by fire. The 50-ton ship had obviously suffered a fire, but since there was no smoke anymore, it was clear it had been a few days since the fire was put out. Upon inspecting the ship, it was realized that the ship's lifeboat, along with its 3 life rafts, were missing, not to mention the crew of 29 missing men. The last transmission from the radio of the ship was on October 28th, but after that, nothing had been heard from the members of the crew and there was no mayday call ever received. The search for the missing men spanned 21,000 square miles or 54,000 square kilometers, and searches were conducted by both the US Air Force as well as the New Zealand Air Force, but unfortunately the search turned up no results. The last radio transmission from the ship was a personal call from the captain to his wife, which took place on that October 25th, but that was the last time anyone had heard. There still hasn't been any sign of the missing 29 crew members, which of course is absolutely devastating. It is clear they must have abandoned the ship after the fire started, but their fate from there remains completely unknown. In our number 3 spot today, we have the disappearance of Rebecca Corium. Rebecca Corium was a British crew member and youth worker on the Disney Wonder cruise ship in 2011. In the early morning hours of March 22nd, Rebecca was seen on CCTV footage in the crew lounge speaking to someone on the telephone, and it appears as though the conversation was a bit emotionally distressing for her. A few hours later, people began to worry because Rebecca hadn't shown up for the start of her shift, which was really unlike her, and when people went to go and see if maybe she had slept in or something like that, they were unable to locate her anywhere on the ship, which of course made people even more worried. That CCTV footage of Rebecca is the last known sighting of her, and since then no one has been able to figure out where she went or what happened to her. The first assumption was of course that perhaps she had gone overboard, and it prompted extensive searches of the waters in the area, but unfortunately nothing turned up. Almost an entire year after her disappearance, someone emailed Rebecca's family to say that she was 85% sure she had seen Rebecca with a man on the streets of Venice, but unfortunately this potential lead didn't turn up any real evidence or clues. Many people state that perhaps Disney Cruise Lines know more about what really happened, as other crew members have suggested that the entire ship is covered with so many cameras that there's no way that whatever happened could have been missed, but of course there's no evidence that has been discovered which would prove these allegations. It has been 10 years since Rebecca's extremely mysterious disappearance, and still no one knows exactly what happened on that terrible night. Hopefully one day some answers are found so Rebecca's family can get the closure that they deserve. In our number 2 spot today, we have the disappearance of Jim Gray. Jim Gray was an incredibly important computer scientist who was responsible for many computer advancements that changed things for all of us. Other than being a computer scientist, he was also an experienced and skilled sailor, and one day on January 28th, 2007, he set sail for a short trip so he could head out and spread his mother's ashes, as she had recently passed away. As he began his trip, Jim spoke to his wife on the phone and said he would call her once he got back in range. After their phone call, he called his daughter as well and left a little message for her, and then he was off on his trip, but unfortunately he never ended up returning. Jim's wife Donna was the one who raised the alarm bells as she was away on a trip, but like I mentioned, Jim said he would call her later, and he never did. At this point is when the huge searches began. Thousands of images of the area where Jim or his boat might be were uploaded to Amazon Mechanical Turk for people to look through and see if they could find any kind of signs, but to no avail. Jim also had an automatic emergency position indicating beacon on his ship, but whatever happened to Jim and the ship clearly didn't meet the requirements, or perhaps it had some sort of malfunction, or maybe it was even turned off. To this day, no one knows what happened to Jim or his boat, as no sign or trace of either has ever been found. The theories of what may have happened are endless and range from Jim intentionally disappearing to him being kidnapped for his computer skills and brain in order to do some kind of inside job, and really everything in between. There most definitely are theories that are seemingly more likely than others, but at the end of the day, they are all a possibility. In 2012, Jim's widow asked the court to declare him dead in absentia, which ended up being granted, so as of 2012, Jim has been declared dead, but that does not mean that he is. In our number 1 spot today, we have the disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley. On March 21st, 1998, Amy and her family boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas, which is a Royal Caribbean cruise ship en route to Curaçao. On March 24th, after a fun night on the ship, Amy was hanging out and having a couple of drinks with the ship's band, and one of the members explained that she parted ways with them around 1 a.m. After this, around 5:15 a.m., Amy's father said he saw her sleeping on the cabin balcony. Unfortunately, however, once 6 a.m. rolled around, she wasn't there anymore, and this was the beginning of the mystery. Once it was realized that Amy was missing, extensive searches were launched for full days before they ended up being called off when no signs or traces of Amy had ever been found. While this is all super mysterious and nobody really had anything to go on, the plot only thickens with this story. After her disappearance, people began to report seeing Amy. One sighting was by Canadian tourists in 1998 who said that they had seen a woman who resembled Amy and who had tattoos that matched hers on a beach in Curaçao. A member of the United States Navy said that he saw her in a brothel and said that she told him her name was Amy and she asked for help, saying she wasn't allowed to leave. The most recent alleged sighting comes in 2005 when a woman claimed she saw Amy in a department store in Barbados. She said that Amy entered the restroom with 3 men who then threatened her if she didn't follow through on some sort of deal. The men left briefly and the witness said the woman turned to her, said that her name was Amy and that she was from Virginia and needed help, but the men returned right after to take her away again. This story is devastatingly sad and has so many turns, and to this day, no one knows exactly what happened to Amy or if these witness sightings are accurate at all.
Starting off this countdown, we have the HMS Sea Serpent. In August of 1848, the crew on the HMS Daedalus was sailing in the South Atlantic when they spotted this terrifying creature. According to the ship's captain and several members of the crew, they claimed that the monster was 60 feet in length, with 4 feet of his head raising out of the water. This massive sea beast lurked around the ship for 20 minutes before taking off. To this day, we don't know what it is that they saw. They described it as being a long snake with a dragon's head. Pretty weird and creepy, right? Well, they aren't the only ones who witnessed this too. It was spotted a second time by the American brig Daphne, and in fact, crew on board even shot at it. Scientists claim that maybe they just saw a whale, but come on, a bunch of experienced sailors would know the difference between a whale and something that's not a whale. And at number 9 today, we have the Mary Celeste, and if you guys are liking this video so far, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. To this day, the mysterious case of the Mary Celeste is considered one of the creepiest cases in nautical history. Basically, in 1872, the Mary Celeste was found abandoned in the middle of choppy waters. The crew was nowhere to be found. All the cargo on board remained untouched. Now, the lifeboats were missing, which makes people believe that the crew tried to get off the ship and flee. But why would they just abandon their ship like that? Well, we got a number of theories. 1, a sea monster got them. 2, a pirate takeover occurred. 3, they were abducted by aliens, or 4, they consumed bad food and they all went mad. I know, it seems wild. To make matters weirder though, the crew and lifeboats were never found. No one knows what happened aboard that ship. In our 8th spot, we have the Baltic Sea anomaly. In 2011, a group of divers went out looking for treasure in the Baltic Sea, and they came across something weird. It was a 70-meter long weird object laying 300 feet below sea level. This thing has since been named the Baltic Sea Anomaly, and no one knows what the heck it is. It's just this massive steel-looking structure shaped like a disc with some weird patterns on it. Gets weirder when the divers claim their equipment randomly stopped working when they got closer to the object. There was a massive electrical interference there. So what is this thing? Honestly, we don't know. But some people think it's a glacial deposit left from thawing glaciers. Or it's part of a UFO spacecraft from one extreme to another. Could be either or, who knows. In our 7th spot, we have the 3 men. In 2007, 3 Australian men headed out on an expedition together. 3 days later, their ship was found drifting by itself in the middle of the ocean. The men were nowhere to be found. That's not all. On the ship, they found knives all over the cabin floor, as if there had been a fight and people were scrambling for weapons. What happened to these men still remains a mystery to this day. But of course, we got the theories. One is that they got into a devastating fight and they all ended up dying. Or 2, their propeller became snarled in a fishing line. One dude went to go free the line but then fell into the ocean. The second dude tried to save him and then fell in as well, and then so on with the third guy, or who even knows. Okay, we don't know for sure, that's just a theory. The only thing we do know is that this case is pretty creepy. Moving on to number 6, we have the Kraken. So it may just be that the Kraken is real, but it's not what we think it is. In fact, the legend of the Kraken was thought to have been born after a number of sailors spotted giant squids while sailing. So the Kraken might actually just be giant squids. In 1870, a giant squid washed up in New Zealand. Legend goes that it was as tall as the top of a ship's main mast, and it could easily take over a ship by wrapping its tentacles around the hull and crushing it. Is this true? Who knows? But no one believed that giant squids were real until around 2005. That's when scientists caught a photo of one. Then in 2013 they got a video of one. Now they believe there are millions of giant squids out there. The mystery here is, what beast did the sailors encounter in 1870? Was it a ginormous squid, or was it a kraken, or is a squid a kraken? Who even knows, okay? There's just so many questions out there that we need answers to. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the cursed shipwreck. Back in the early 2000s, a natural gas company was laying pipeline in the ocean when they came across a shipwreck. Nowadays, this shipwreck is considered cursed or haunted. Let me explain why. So after the shipwreck was discovered, a team was sent down there to check it out. But everything that could go wrong did. First, the exploration sub malfunctioned right as it was getting ready to explore the wreck. Then the Navy sent a research sub down there and it literally self-destructed upon entering the water. Then over the course of a couple of years, other attempts have been made to explore the ship, but those have gone wrong as well. None have been successful. So now it's believed that this ship is cursed and doesn't want anyone entering it. In our 4th spot, we have the disappearing submarines. In 1968, 4 different submarines all mysteriously went missing. As a result, people believe that this can no way just be a coincidence. Something was out there sinking these subs. The subs were the USS Scorpion, the Soviet submarine K-129, a French submarine Minerve, and the INS Dakar. In fact, the French sub and the INS Dakar disappeared only 4 days apart. The French submarine has still never been found. What's weird is that it disappeared only an hour away from its port, so you think they'd be able to track it down, but nope. So what are the odds that 4 massive submarines go missing the exact same year? What could have caused this? We'll probably never know. In our 3rd spot, we have Sylvester Butler Jr. Apparently a number of people mysteriously vanish off of cruise ships each year. Most of them have never been found. Today, let's look at the weird case of Sylvester Butler Jr. In May of 2017, Sylvester boarded a cruise ship headed to the Pacific Islands. While on board though, the crew noticed he was acting weird. He kept to himself, barely talked to anyone else, and housekeeping claimed that he never unpacked his bags. The only charge on his bill was the occasional soft drink he would order to his room. Also, every time the cruise made a stop, he never left the ship. Then somewhere between Fiji and the final port Sydney, crew noticed that he was missing. No one knows what happened to him. And the ship's CCTV footage revealed nothing. It's sad, but theory goes that Butler jumped off the ship and took his own life. Apparently he suffered from a chronic genetic kidney disease, so maybe he wanted to end his suffering, but we don't know for sure. On top of that, I believe that his body was never found. Coming in our 2nd spot today, we have the Stronsay Beast. The Stronsay Beast is the name given to a massive carcass that washed ashore on Stronsay Island on September of 1808. At first, people thought it was just the body of a shark, but this creature had paws instead of fins. So then people were hella confused. Not only that, but it was 55 feet long. But part of its tail was missing, so clearly this thing was even bigger than that. This beast was described as follows, and I quote, "Its flesh was described as being like coarse, ill-colored beef, entirely covered with fat and tallow, and without the least resemblance or affinity to fish. The skin, which was gray-colored and had an elastic texture, was said to be about 2 inches thick in parts." End quote. Not only that, but its bristles glowed in the dark when wet, and the contents in its stomach were red. So what is this beast? The Natural History Society of Edinburgh believes that it is a sea serpent of some sorts. Maybe the Loch Ness Monster or its long-lost brother, who knows. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Orang-Medan. So this next mystery is pretty freaking creepy, I'm not gonna lie. It's gonna keep you up at night. So in 1947, 2 American ships received a distress call from the ship the Orang-Medan. The SOS call was from a crew member that stated everyone on board the ship had died. Then all of a sudden, his SOS ended with his last message being, "I die." When the ships arrived, they found the ship completely unharmed. The entire crew, including a dog on board, had died. Everyone had a terrified look plastered on their face. No one knows what happened to the ship. Theory goes, though, that maybe they were exposed to some dangerous gas and died. That seems to be the most common theory out there.